professor in the Biochemistry Department, University of Allahabad. I will be presenting you with module number 13, Biological Basis of Gender, Perspectives in Women's Studies, of paper 12, Women's Science and Technology, of the EPG Pathshala course in Women's Studies. What this module will tell you how innate differences between men and women arise, determined by sex at birth as a binary attribute, while gender is a construct based on social and cultural factors. The module will further discuss the biological basis of other attributes which are assigned to either men or women, such as aggression, competitive, emotional, sympathetic, docile, etc. Some of these are male, some of these are female, and argue that these are not binary attributes. They are of statistical nature with large overlap, so many traits that may be more frequent in one gender will have a large number of individuals in the other gender. The module will also discuss why such traits may have high dependence on nurture. The issue will be discussed in the context of gender stereotyping, which could lead to creation of an unhealthy divide between the sexes. The module will emphasize the central role of the female in the reproductive process, and it will say that it will explain why it should not be undermined. The module will also finally emphasize the role of gender studies in advocating equity of opportunity based on individual inclinations within the ambit of sex differences, which cannot be done away, and reproductive requirements to promote harmony and not acrimony between the sexes. Now, what do we mean by sex and gender? This has been discussed in your paper several times. Gender is a culturally and socially constructed difference between men and women, and the WHO has included norms, roles and relationships between groups of women and men to describe it. Sex is a biological difference between men and women. This is innate, it is binary, and it is determined at birth. The terms are used interchangeably, but they are not supposed to mean the same. Gender encompasses a range of physical, mental and behavioral characteristics pertaining to and differentiating between masculinity and femininity. Gender issues are different in different cultures. Sex is a more definitive term. It is determined by well-defined, well-understood and identifiable events. How is the sex of an individual determined? It is determined by the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid present in each cell, each living cell in the living system. In humans, it consists of DNA, which is made up of 3 billion units known as nucleotides. The DNA is also responsible for all the genetic information in an individual, which will create the individual as one grows. Now, DNA is normally organized in the chromosome in humans into 23 pairs, that is, there are 46 chromosomes, except in the gametes or the sex cells. The human body is made up of something like 3.9 billion cells, and the sex cells are known as sperms in males and ovum in females. The ovum possesses 23 chromosomes and the sperm possesses another 23 chromosomes, and when the two come together, the zygote is created, which fuse the two sets of chromosomes, and the final zygote has a full set of 46 chromosomes. The zygote is what begins life, and it develops either into a male or into a female, and this depends only on the sperm. If the sperm has an X chromosome, the offspring is a female. If the sperm has a Y chromosome, the offspring is a male. Now, the ovum, interestingly, is the largest cell in the body. It has a diameter of 150 micrometer. The sperm is the smallest cell in the body. It's thread-like with a negligible width, and its length is about 50 micrometer long, 1/3 of the ovum. Both contain 23 chromosomes each. The 23rd chromosome of the sperm is either an X or a Y. You can see the diagram on the previous slide. And fertilization is the beginning of the new organism, which begins with 23 chromosomes from the father and 23 from the mother. These jumble up by a process called crossing over to form a complete set of 46 chromosomes, and the information from both parents directs the growth of the offspring from a single celled zygote to an adult who has about 39 trillion cells in the body. If you the diagram there tells you how the two compare, the ovum and the sperm, their relative sizes are visible. Also interesting is that the ovum has a mitochondrion which has its own DNA, and so the mother contributes a little more DNA to the offspring than the father. The size of the ovum is much more than the sperm, and this is the beginning of gender difference, of gender. The ovum provides more nutrients, it provides more DNA, and the female carries the offspring in her womb for 9 months. Clearly, the investment of the mother is more than that of the father. Now, another important thing is that the newborn human is among the most helpless newborns among all species. You can see from the diagrams, newly born puppies, they are able to fend for themselves and reach the mother for their milk, but the human baby is not able to do anything on its own. Both the human brain is the most underdeveloped. If nature had allowed the kind of development that other animals show for the human brain, the gestation period would have to be about more than double of what it is right now. And this is the price that we pay for a large human brain. The human mother, therefore, has to nurture the baby with lactation and with full-time care and support even after the baby is born, a role that the father cannot play. Clearly, the mother's investment is much, much more through beginning at the formation of the zygote, through pregnancy and lactation, and much more than the father's. Now, death is the only certainty in the world, everyone knows that, and what survives after death is one's genes through one's offspring. Therefore, it makes sense for every parent to intuitively safeguard one's offspring. This is the gene-centered view of evolution, which has been popularized by Richard Dawkins in his book called The Selfish Gene, and forms the basis of a lot of gender-related issues. This is the concept of viewing genes as they were the primary drivers and beneficiaries of the evolutionary process. It describes why the more two individuals are genetically related, the more sense it makes for them to behave selflessly with each other at the level of the genes. It is the genes that must survive. So, if I can't survive, my offspring should. Due to mitochondrial DNA, the mother is more genetically related to the offspring, and the male invests to ensure that the offspring he is protecting is actually his own, while the investment of the mother is larger in both in terms of nature as well as nurture. So, gender as a social construct, we can start explaining it by the biology that determines it. Now, the consequences of the XY chromosome and the DNA present in the chromosomes is the determination of the genetic sex. The genetic sex determines certain direct sex differences. The internal and external reproductive anatomy, the external genitalia, the breast differentiation, the reproductive cells that will be that are present in the offspring, which will make the new offspring, which will carry on generations on earth. Endocrine differences, the male sex hormone, whether the body will produce male sex hormones or female sex hormones, all this is determined at birth because of the genes that have been transferred from the parents to the offspring. Now, the most visible consequences of sex differences lead to the differences in the reproductive inputs of males and females. You can imagine a prehistoric scenario where the environment was very harsh and unsafe, and foraging for food in hostile jungles was a difficult task. Males had to protect their genes in the offspring, so they undertook the more dangerous roles while the women stayed at home. This was partly because of the genetic endowment of muscle and more physical strength to the males. Later, physically intensive agriculture, early industrial labor was very labor intensive. So, there was need for the women to remain in the house while the men faced the more harsh environment. The woman had to be protected during pregnancy and lactation. She had to be provided a safe environment for herself and for the offspring, and this led to a desirable division of labor. The social repercussions of this desirable event must have led to, this is a conjecture, but a very logical conjecture, it must have led to undesirable social conventions. The beginning of discrimination against women, their oppression, must have begun at that time, because men were interacting with each other. They had a more social nature to their job, and also they were the ones providing the economic resources to survive. So, their job elicited more respect, while the women worked very hard within the home, but their contribution was less visible. This must have led to their worsening status in society, and this has been observed consistently all over the world through history and across varied culture. Although it is a conjecture, it is a very reasonable conjecture. Thus, the biological difference in reproductive functions of men and women, which is the most important function of humans for their continuation on earth, became inadvertently responsible for evolution of gender and the historical subservience of the female gender. Indirect sex differences are different from direct sex differences. Direct sex differences are those which come from the genetics, which come from the X and Y chromosomes. Indirect sex differences are different from direct sex differences, which arise because of the genetic nature of the determination of whether a cell will grow to be a female or a male. The indirect sex differences are traits which result from biological adaptations and are assigned to the female gender or the male gender. They are generally quantified by empirical studies and are of statistical nature. They are a range of physical, mental and behavioral characteristics which are pertaining to and differentiating between masculinity and femininity. These are the ones that are often studied under gender differences and have a role to play in social situations. Now, some frequently used gender specific attributes can be called indirect sex differences. For example, men are generally said to be aggressive, competitive, ambitious, unemotional, strong, decisive, poor in communicating feelings, focused, adventurous, while women are supposed to be soft, emotional, sympathetic, docile, gentle, talkative, contented, less competitive, good at multitasking. But these are not binary attributes. You will have men who are soft and you will have women who are aggressive. So, these are generally of a statistical nature, and the basis of these attributes is a continuing debate in gender studies. There is a need to explore whether there is a fundamental difference in males and females with regard to these traits. Are they linked to genetics, that is the XY chromosome? Is the brain of males and females actually different, or are they just based on nurture? The psychological and behavioral attributes have been investigated extensively by neuroscientists in recent times. Dimorphic male and female structures have been explored, and anatomical differences have been found in female and male brains, but they are not consistent across all males and all females. It is difficult to say that this is a female brain and all female brains are going to have these structures. There are these differences exist only as averages with large overlapping variabilities. Statistically, also some of these traits are more frequent in one gender. However, a large number of individuals in the other gender will have those traits, while there will be a large number of individuals in the first gender who will not have those traits. So, the viewpoint that has so far dominated society is known as the differences model, which is the butt of a lot of jokes and which highlights the differences between males and females. This is a cartoon which is demonstrating this gender difference. You can see the picture that the children are exposed to in the cartoon, where the roles of the men and women are different, while in the class they are told that they are there is no gender difference. Equality is emphasized, but society is not reinforcing that equality. The gender differences model shows that male brains have been structured to facilitate connectivity between perception and coordinated action, and men have better motor and spatial abilities. Female brains have been designated to facilitate communication between analytical and intuitive processing modes and have superior memory and social cognition skills. Again, as I said, this is the differences model emphasizes these differences, which the existing research emphasizes is statistical. This is now being challenged by the gender similarities model. In this, the cognitive variables such as reading, comprehension, mathematics, communication, social, personality traits, aggression, sexuality, psychological well-being and motor behaviors have been assessed. Men and women have been found similar on most psychological parameters, with the exception of some motor behaviors such as throwing distance, some aspects of sexuality such as attitudes about casual sex. So, there exists a possibility that there are sexually dimorphic psychological adaptations, and that all psychological adaptations may not be monomorphic. Monomorphic means attributed to one sex. Some other indirect sex differences that have been reported are disease propensity. For example, men seem to be more prone to cardiac diseases than younger women, but the advantage disappears after menopause when the women start losing their estrogen. Estrogen is of course genetically determined, it is a part of the XY chromosome difference. So, there are indirect differences which are caused by the genetics, but they are not entirely genetic, they are influenced by environmental factors. Women are more prone to osteoporosis, women outlive men by 5 years. These are all statements of fact, but their basis needs more analysis. The issue of nature versus nurture, there has been a considerable consensus among scientists that gender attributes are not universal, but are statistical. The focus of investigation in biology and in social sciences continues to be to assess whether so called gender attributes have origins in genetics, that is nature, or whether it is traceable to social conditioning or nurture. But a nature versus nurture is a faulty viewpoint, because the brain cannot be a clean slate at birth. Lots of hardwiring is already there at birth, but this which constitutes nature makes a small contribution, and nurture magnifies these differences due to expectations that come from the environment. For example, the contribution of nature has been studied by sophisticated MRI, magnetic resonance imaging techniques, which have scanned brains at birth, and it is found that there is some hardwire differences, but these are not inchangeable. It is found that the brain has a great deal of plasticity and malleability to change with experience, and there is reasonable evidence that nurture can change a lot of brain structures that a person is born with. So, the unraveling of the tangle between nature and nurture is more difficult, because we have better technologies to assess these. It is not a simple case of nature versus nurture. Gender awareness is reinforced in various ways early in life with stereotypes of color preferences, blue for boys, pink for girls. The market is full of clothes for boys and clothes for girls with special colors, the types of toys that are given to them. The girl's birthday, she gets a lot of kitchen sets and dolls, while the boys get cars and aeroplanes. So, these are all strengthened. The gender awareness is strengthened by observing the role play between their parents at home and in society in general. The influence of nurture is often subconscious, subtle, and difficult to quantify. Feminine attributes offered an evolutionary advantage to women in their child rearing functions. The male attributes, a legacy of the history of soul-bred earners in a competitive environment of limited resources, help the males to nurture their offspring. So, ultimately, we must understand and we must appreciate that any individual is an amalgam of the influences of genetics, hormones which are determined by the genetics, but also by the environment and environment itself. Now, another problem that is more important in gender studies is that male attributes have generally been regarded as superior to female ones. Society is evolving. Due to tremendous changes in technology, contraception, mechanization and medical advances, the differences between men and women, the environment that they are growing up in, those are changing. So, gender stereotyping requires a major overhaul, and this has begun. There is a lot of awareness in society today. Overinflated claims of gender differences carry substantial costs in workplaces as well as in relationships, and these must be studied, these must be systematically done away with. Equality of opportunity, equity of opportunity, these are the major requirements of today's society. Now, these attributes that we have been talking about, we must realize, society must emphasize that both the masculine and the feminine attributes are required for harmony on earth. Large amounts of time, energy and resources are spent on the debate regarding the origin of gender differences and the nature-nurture conundrum. In academic debate, it is okay. But for society, the question is what is required for a complete, peaceful and prosperous existence of humankind. Whether attributes are gender centric, whether they have origins in genetics, in biology, in the environment, has little bearing on their essentiality. All attributes, being soft, being aggressive, being emotional, being more even headed, these are all required for the well-being of the human race. So, the inescapable truth is that reproduction is important for the preservation of the human race. It has a centric role. The women have a centric role in this function. Nobody can take that away. Society consists of both men and women, and the need is to ensure respect for attributes that help in the function of reproduction. Occupations that are predominantly male have earned more respect historically. Occupations where women have to contribute or have traditionally contributed household work, tasks associated with bringing up progeny, these have all been women centric, and they have always been given secondary place in society. But can one society exist without them? No. So, the need is to ensure respect for attributes that help in this function. The trend is to undervalue many attributes that are considered feminine, and this trend is very dangerous. Society must endeavor to ensure equal respect for all functions that help sustain the position of humans on earth, and humans are both male and female. So, in an ideal society, there is no place for gender inequality. There is no need for men and women to be adversaries. The natural attributes of both are equally important, whether they arise due to nature or nurture. Men and women are not two sets of humans at constant war against each other, and jokes are okay as jokes, but if they highlight the stereotype gender attributes, then they can cause an increase in gender divide and influence impressionable young minds. All behavior that increases gender divide needs to be discouraged at all levels. Gender stereotypes should also be avoided because there is such a large statistical overlap in them. Large number of little boys exist with the more so-called feminine attributes. They enjoy playing with dolls or pretend cooking, but they are discouraged. They are even made fun of. Oh, are you a little sissy? Are you a little girl? Those are the kinds of remarks that cause a faulty notion of feminine tasks in the minds of boys. Similarly, girls with attributes considered more masculine, tomboys, they are considered masculine, which is also not, you are a girl, you have to behave yourself, you have to show some interest in the kitchen, you have to play with dolls. Those are covert ways of emphasizing, of reinforcing gender divides. Such gender role reversals are encouraged in subtle ways, and it requires a change in mindset to create more gender neutral environment at home, in schools and everywhere around us. Now, due to the large overlap of gender characteristics such as proficiency in household related activities which are considered the domain of women, efforts need to be made to reduce the awareness of gender role play at a very young age, and the hierarchy of gender specific attributes is undesirable, and it is meaningless for a harmonious society. Every kind of quality has utility, and it must be developed due to innate inclinations. Healthy attitudes about sex differences, gender differences must be developed throughout life in homes, schools and society across cultures. Now, a more recent term to gender equality is gender equity. Gender equality is generally emphasized as equal opportunity for males and females with regard to education, equal wages for equal work, access to and control of social, economic and political resources, protection under the law, health services and voting rights. These are important without doubt, but gender equity is an entire bundle of human attributes in thought and action, and the recognition that men and women have different needs, different preferences and different interests. So, the treatment is needed to ensure respect for all these needs, preferences and interests which are necessary very often to promote the reproductive process, to help in her greater investment in the reproductive process. And this begins at conception, and this must not be forgotten. So, equity includes the differences in men and women with regard to their genetics, with regard to their requirements for the reproductive process. Gender equality generally emphasizes that men and women should be equal. Women are exhorted to be like men, which is not a desirable trend in society. So, gender equity is a more responsible term, and society needs to, gender studies need to ensure that gender equity is the norm that we teach our future generations. I end with a quote from a song by Professor Higgins in the iconic movie My Fair Lady. This is an old movie of the 50s, in which he begins and he sings along, "Why can't a woman be more like a man?" Biology may partially answer his lament. This is an old movie where Professor Higgins is a misogynist. The song reeks of misogyny, but misogyny has no place in the modern world, and it hopes of a truly equitous society with equal respect for male and female attributes and no place for acrimony between the sexes. Thank you.